our civilization is not going well.
A lot of loss is already on course.
You do keep pointing about what's wrong with the current system.
It means we have to rethink everything.
But why?
Why?
That ground comes from life itself.
Open up our curiosity even.
Ele é uma mudança dos sujeitos que têm direito a imaginar, né?
Looking at the individual as multidimensional.
That our nature is to flourish, our nature is to blossom, to be as great as we can.
So I would like to share with you kind of two main perspectives that we thought it had to do with your work. One is the kind of statement of this project, or the proposal of this project, saying that one perspective shift we need to do is our view of society from given to socially constructed. And so this view of we shape realities and we are doing this together and we live in, and for instance, the narrative that Kate Raworth put it very well, we live in a reality that was once shaped. Like some people really met in Switzerland in this year, and they wrote the neoliberal discourse and like the characters.
And it's good to put like a movie.
Yes.
We feel like it's a movie, it's a story.
Yes.
It's all about story.
And then you come back to, okay, so we do have the power to do it differently. But then also putting this as from this view of we live in this constructed reality, and the global market is actually a collective imaginary, because if we didn't all believe in the same kind of stuff, so it's a set of beliefs that kind of underpins our relations. And then when we're talking about changing beliefs, are we addressing correctly when we are showing graphs, how collapses are going on and numbers? How are we going to tackle beliefs with this framework of like maybe a really well-written book with information, a really good presentation with reflection? Yep. But we are trying to tackle like feelings at the same time. So just proposing some disturbance here in our talk also to reflect about it.
Great. I mean, I think that one thing that you've made me think about is how I used to, many years ago, talk about the broken economy. You know, the economy is broken, but actually it's not. It's not broken at all. It's delivering exactly what it is designed to deliver by those very few people. And I talked yesterday about these plutocrats who control the rules of the game, and they have such political influence that they can shape things like how we tax different activities so that it's in their favour. So the idea that it's broken is, I think, really false, because it's actually constructed in a way and it's delivering what it's designed to do. But there's also the extent of that proactive design, I think, has many layers to it, and it gets to the fuzzier layer of that mindset idea of how what we assume works, what we assume will be a good thing. So I've got a good friend. She's a very thoughtful, caring person. But we were talking about politics a couple of months ago, and she just said, well, of course we need the party that's going to get the economy growing faster. And I just, and I said to her, why do you say that? And she said, well, of course, that's how we'll get good jobs, and that's how we'll be able to pay for our schools and so on. And it's just so deeply entrenched. So there's that really deliberate playing around with the rules of the game, things like tax systems and subsidies. But then there's it's a whole sort of spectrum right down to the fuzzier stuff that's in our mind. But when you look at debates around how, for example, history is taught in schools, and I don't know about here, but in the UK and in Australia, there's been a really topical debate. People saying the history that school kids are learning is white man's victor's history, and it doesn't bear reality. It doesn't reflect reality. The same thing, other subjects that are taught in schools, and economics would be a classic example. They're designed by the winners of the current system. And so we need an economics that's taught in a way that actually reflects that this is, as Maya talked about, this is a battle. Yeah, decolonize economics, I guess. Yeah. So that's just one thing that that sparked off. The other thing that comes to mind listening to you talk is something I've been wrestling with for a while, and it's how do we take this conversation outside conferences like this to, say, the guy who drove our Uber on the way here, or maybe the people who made this coffee. I think, and often, and I go there, but I don't think that's everything. I think when people say very critically, you're preaching to the choir, I think there is merit in that, because you preach to the choir, you get the choir singing louder. Yeah. So that's a good thing. That really matters.
I got goosebumps now.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? So Donella Meadows says one of her ideas of how you change system is you do keep pointing about what's wrong with the current system, and you point out how things can change. Yes. And so I do think that's important to do that articulation, whatever audience, to build energy and momentum. But I think if that's all we're doing, we might still be in a bubble, but might be a bigger bubble. Great, yeah. But we need to get outside that. And I think where I get, I guess, my sense that it will be okay and it's possible is because from the very beginning of my studies, I'm a student of deliberative democracy. Mm-hmm. This is sort of my roots. Even before I came into the new economy space, I worked for my PhD. One of my supervisors was a guy called John Dryzak, who's one of the leading thinkers in deliberative democracy. And essentially the essence of that is when you sit down with people and you have a conversation with them, and they can bring in evidence and they can reflect on evidence and they can argue their case, but in a gentle way, and they can reflect on the other people's arguments. All the experience of deliberative processes is that people come to a reasoned view that is good for the collective, and it's away from the sort of politics that we're getting at the moment. It's a much more thoughtful, I guess, magnanimous decisions come out of those processes, and you see examples of that time and time again. And so a project that you guys know about that I ran in Scotland many, many years ago, where we sat down with people and said, what really matters to you? And we really were very conscious of creating spaces for discussion, the Humankind Index. We did that again in India with colleagues in India. Yeah, I showed a photo of it yesterday. No, many years ago. And for various reasons, it wasn't published. Yeah, it was tweaked, but it was the same sort of questions going into some of the most marginalised communities in Delhi. So speaking to tribal groups, with Dalits, like the girls you saw in that photo, with Muslim communities, with women, and creating space to say what matters to you. And then a good friend of mine and Maya's and good partner of the Wellbeing Economy, a woman called Justine Braby, she's done something very similar in Namibia. And it's almost identical in process to the Humankind Index, but it's in a completely different context. And she's made a video about it, and I watched this video about this time last year, actually probably almost to the day last year, and we were in Pretoria with the beginnings of the Wellbeing Economy, and she was playing this video. And so it was interviews with people in Namibia, and I had tears pouring down my face, because even the language that people in Namibia were using was exactly the sort of language that people in parts of Scotland were using when they talked about what mattered to them. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And why it was so emotional to me is because these things are what makes us innately human. Yeah, these are common characteristics that are in our blood as human beings, wherever we are in the world. And what's created differences is, Manfred Max Neef's idea of pseudo-satisfiers. We've tried to satisfy...
To make borders.
Yeah, exactly. We've tried to give our sense of security by putting up walls. Or we've tried to define our need, a very human need for relationships and, social affiliation through material products, and consumerism. Or we've tried to find our need for sense of, status through fast cars and having massive houses. And so they're all very natural human needs, but we're trying to fulfill them in a way that's toxic. Yeah, exactly. And so that's a long way of saying, coming back to this idea that how we take these conversations outside conferences like this, outside the webinars that we go on, outside the books that people have to want to read, Don't Economics or The Great Mind Shift, or hopefully one or two people might want to read the book I've written. I don't know. It's not going to be in YouTube. Two people will be brilliant. People have to want to pick up that book and read it. So they're people who are already interested. Exactly. Yeah? How we take it to the people who make our coffee and drive the taxis and mow the lawn. and the people who vote, is by connecting with that innate humanness. The challenge, but also the opportunity I think that I'm excited about is creating those conversations. So I think recognizing that we need to do that is step one. Step two then is going back to the deep kernel of resonance. And I was saying yesterday, it's in scholarship from great development scholars, but it's also neuroscience tells us, this is what makes different, parts of our brain light up. This is what, releases or suppresses the stress hormone cortisol. This is what really matters to us. So how we go back to that, that's the beginning of it. And this is, I think, what the conversation we just had at the end of the last session is, start with values. And then you find the language to communicate that. And that might be very different language wherever you are in the world. And so that is part of the challenge, is audience segmentation. Which groups do we need to speak to? And I think there's also quite a brutal conversation about maybe when we're thinking in terms of critical mass, are there some audiences that actually we maybe just don't need to bother with because they're not as influential, or they're not the audiences that are going to be leading this change or leading this creation of the new normal. And so understanding that is something I definitely need to get my head around. Which audiences do we need to reach to?
Questions around it also.
Yeah, and then how do we reach them? One thing I've seen recently
also without including them, what kind of change you are proposing, if you're already choosing who is there,
who is
defining this framework of values that we say is needed.
Yeah.
Like who's in the room.
Yes.
Defining that.
Yeah. In terms of instrumentally though, moving the conversation along, there will be some groups that aren't as instrumental, it's really, it's a tough word to use, but aren't as youthful.
Yes.
So for example, focusing our energies on those key audience groups that are going to most lead the sort of change, I think will be key. One example is my parents. They now use cups like this, but they were never going to be at the forefront of that. They picked that up because my brother and my sister-in-law watched with my little nephews all the David Attenborough stuff. They got into all the plastics, and they're both already quite environmentally conscious. And then they basically, I think, probably shamed my mum and dad into, we better. So now they take not even these cups. So, but they were never going to be at the forefront. They were never going to be the one that the message should target first and foremost. So just sort of getting our heads around which audiences are going to be the ones who are warmest to this. There's research done in terms of how you communicate about refugees and asylum seekers, and they talk that evidence is that actually you shouldn't bother talking to people who are at the far end of hostility, because they are very unlikely to ever change unless they have some sort of serendipitous moment where they, fall in love with a refugee or something. And even then they might say, well, I'm still in love with that individual, but
just
the rest are awful. But there's a spectrum of people who are maybe a bit warmer, a bit open-minded, but still hostile. They're the ones you can engage in a conversation. So working that through, I think, is a key
the one kind of on the fence.
Or maybe looking at the fence.
Maybe looking at the fence.
But the ones who are at the other end of the field, maybe not. But eventually they'll be lonely and they'll come along.
But there's one provocation here that I think it's interesting. I got a feedback from a workshop we're doing with the school the other day. A professor clearly said, I don't believe in systems that are value-free, that are not putting out their values.
Yeah.
And if they are not actually explicitly talking about their values, it's probably implicit and it's something you wouldn't like. That's why it's not safe.
Yeah. So he's saying there's no such thing as empty.
Yeah, you say innovation because you don't want to say it's innovation for GDP growth. So you just say innovation. That's kind of assumed on the back. And then the discussion about inclusion, that I think it's different from what you're saying about what kind of audience do you tackle when you want to trigger change and to leverage change. But who is on the table defining this framework of values? Because a lot of times we tend to think, since we have a general knowledge or a deep knowledge, and we are getting researchers and a diversity in terms of background or something, so we are to define this framework of value of this project, for example, that can be small or big. But I still feel that until we have everyone on the table, and that means even the guys like on the other
Yes.
side of the fence,
Yeah, that's a
like
different
far
question.
away.
It's
Yes,
a different question.
it's a different thing about audience.
Well, exactly.
Yes.
Nature, right?
How do we integrate these interests when we are doing, when we are like calling ourselves change makers or activists or post-activists, as Bayo says? How do we integrate these voices? Because otherwise, it's another time we're building another truth from a group of people that we may seem very diverse because we come from different parts of the globe and all, but still we already have the same kind of framework and.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be encouraged not to try and focus on the perfect, because I think take that thinking to its right. What does this mean we need to do? And you could end up spending years and years and years consulting. And as someone who's just said I'm a believer in deliberative democracy, that might seem strange, but you can. There's been a lot of conversations. There's already been a lot of research. There's a lot of. You need to be attentive to those values, but there's a risk that you don't do anything. So I think finding the balance is really, really, really key. So you shouldn't. I guess I'd caution against just proceeding without thinking of anyone who's missing, but I would also caution against throwing all the plans up in the air, saying actually we need to speak to the 7 billion people on the planet, because you can't.
Yes.
You need to speak to enough, get a sense of them, and what you'll start learning. And now I've been having these conversations for almost 10 years with Oxfam, in my research in previous jobs, with my research in Australia when I was working in Indigenous communities. You start hearing the same things again and again and again from different communities, wherever they are, and that's the most beautiful pattern when that starts emerging. And I think when you get to a point you start to see those patterns, then you know you're on solid ground. And you guys aren't doing this at all. You are not setting yourselves up and saying, our voice is the only one. You're trying to bring in others' voices. But there is a risk that, we've got such little time. You've got to get on and do stuff as well. Yeah. And they change very quickly. Yeah. So there's a risk of you've got to look sideways, but maybe don't look back.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Maybe there are people that are there are maybe 7 billion. So there are people to look back, there are people to do, there are people to make this
the whole
conversation.
spectrum of
Well, I can't say that resonates. Like there are some things to
roles
people
in
to
different
people to like do everything,
to resist,
like,
to create,
like to have this knowledge of what is your role in that, and then.
Yeah, and I really like what you say about when we actually identify those patterns. It's not about like actual necessarily a big research that represents. It's your work and you realize their patterns. And perhaps like you even went to different parts of the globe and you listened with your heart and you're like, this is the same word, this is the same terms. I'm going to go forward with this idea because I'm pretty sure it resonates with humanity. So like this.
And there's
so also believing in it. Maybe like.
Yeah, believing in the truth, or I guess believing in the essence that comes from that, and the fact that, this is really basic stuff. This is what makes human beings sick or not sick, is where there are opportunities for relationships, for sense of security, for purpose. This stuff, it really is universal, and it's probably very easy for a white woman from a rich country to say this stuff's universal. So I caution what I'm saying with that recognition. But from what I've been able to read and see where we're working with communities around the world, and I don't say I've done loads and loads of that, but you do start to see the same stuff. And then just holding up the consultation we did in Scotland with the consultation in Namibia. It's extraordinary. These people are, these are folks who are sharing what is innately human to them. And the challenge, I think, is that we've got a system that is quashing that, so proactively quashing that. But it's also using what's innately human for really toxic ends as well, as a sales technique or a recruiting sergeant. So I showed a photo yesterday of Coke saying, basically, buy Coke, you'll have happiness. Coke is saying that if you drink more Coke, you'll have more friends. So that is, they're using this and makes us innately human.
We need more friends and community.
Yeah, so they're using it. Exactly. The British Army has got posters on the sides of buses at the moment that is saying, get your true sense of belonging, join the army.
Oh.
So the army is doing this to recruit people to go off to war zones to die. They are using this, what makes us innately human.
Yes.
And why aren't we out there talking to the Uber driver, the coffee person, the person who cuts our hair?
So it was really good to hear you saying about that. We have to trust back again, like, no, there's not going to be like enough numbers to tell me it's right. But if I trust and if I feel it as a value, and if I feel resonating, just a question, but also keep going, right?
Yeah, listen to how others are responding to it. I mean, I'd say it's completely important. I so agree. We've got to be attentive to inclusion, but we can't. It's just we've got to get on and do stuff too. And I think we know enough about human nature and what matters to people through all these different bits of research from different sources.
In our innate feeling.
But for me, like the biggest challenge is what we were talking yesterday. Like, how do we get the person from the coffee to want to understand and want to be part of it? It's because she has to pay the rent. So how can she like trust that will be abundance? If we have, how do we create something, a system that makes people okay with this not having money and
this is so true. This is such a cool question. I think this is a really vital question.
Would want to. I think many people would want to be part of it, but like they can't because they feel it.
Yeah. Tomorrow is scary. Yeah. Tomorrow is scary.
And it's not easy. Just go and trust and solve it. Like
stop and reflect and
like
question
make a community
yourself.
And make people understand, make us understand that we can. Like if I was in the jungle, I couldn't do anything. Like what do I do without money? Maybe we should try to make examples on like our real life to make this more visible. Like I could cook here in the streets. Maybe these kind of things are really like real, doing stuff like this, not on the politics and not on the main thing, doing something in the streets that makes people say, "Oh, I don't need that."
Feasible,
But we need to also really ensure that this individual who's saying, well, I'm scared about my rent tomorrow, which means they're scared about their shelter. They're scared about, will they have a roof over their head tomorrow? So what we need, there's a real onus on those of us, loads of people working on creating a new system to ensure that there's pathways for people to be able to walk. I mean, for example, people working in fossil fuel industries, no wonder they are hanging on for dear life to that industry, because at the moment that's the only secure source of livelihoods that they will get. So what we've got to do, and I say we as in the movement, find transition journeys that those economies, those industries, those families can go on, where the footsteps that they will be taking will be secure. So often when people ask, why do you talk about the economy so much? I say economy is not the most important thing in the world, but imagine if you're trying to walk across a stream, the most important thing is to get to the other side. The economy is like those rocks that you'll step upon. So they really matter, but without them, and if they're slippery and if they're wobbly, then my gosh, you won't get us up the other side. And there need to be enough of them for everyone to have a footstep as well. So the economy matters as a means to an end, but it's not the end in itself. So we need to, and thinking about the woman who's scared of how do I pay the rent tomorrow, we need to ensure that those stepping stones are secure. And that's about different conversations around maybe co-housing, ensuring that her income is going to be high enough. So we're talking about basic income, or we're talking about shared basic assets so that housing is provided collectively. Is it thinking about making sure that her work pays her enough that she's not worried, and it's secure enough that she's not worried about having enough money in her bank account the next week or in her pocket. So it's a real conversation about the practical sense that just taking away all that fear. And that's tricky because this hasn't been done at scale yet. We see little bits of it popping up, but it's not yet joined up. That's the next version 2 of this project.